Shalom, shalom. You can probably see the stairs that I came down, and here we are in the Kidron Valley. And just quickly on a couple of verses that I would like to touch on. We already read back up on top at the Ophel, and you can see the corner, the southeast corner of Herod's walls of the Temple Mount. But we did say where Jesus came in Matthew 26, verse 36, he came with them, the disciples, to a place called Gethsemane. We go to Mark, and in Mark, it says only that they came to a place named Gethsemane. Again, a place named Gethsemane with no connection of Gethsemane to a garden. In Luke, we come to, almost there. Yeah, here it is. This is in Luke chapter 22, starting in verse, oh, there goes my marker. Starting in verse 39, and he came out and proceeded, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples also followed him. And it does not say anything about Garden of Gethsemane. It just says that he went out to the Mount of Olives, as was his custom. Now this is interesting, because as was his custom means we would perhaps conclude that on the feasts, Jesus would come here to camp out. I'll mention that. I'm going to come back to that in just a second, as was his custom. And now let's go to John. And the point being is, none of the Gospels talk about a Garden of Gethsemane. They talk about a place called Gethsemane, or that Jesus came to the Mount of Olives. And so here I am in John 18, starting in verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went over with his disciples over the ravine, over the river, the ravine. If you're going to go over the ravine, the implication is the bridge. And as we talked up above, because of all the tombs down here, it doesn't say the bridge, but that could give the implication of the bridge. Over the Kidron, where there was a garden, in which he entered with his disciples, but it does not say the Garden of Gethsemane. But here's an important piece, which we'll talk about later. Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Because in verse 2 it says, now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So when we take a look at these four verses, we actually come to see that the phrase Garden of Gethsemane is not in the Gospels. And it's a church tradition, and right behind us is the traditional Garden of Gethsemane. Now what I'd like to do is, Robin will pan off to the right. You're going to be looking at the west side of the Kidron, right across from the Mount of Olives, and you're going to be looking at an olive grove. Now, this olive grove obviously is modern, but it is a gan, a cultivated garden, a cultivated hill, and this is at least somewhat of a picture of what the Mount of Olives would have looked like in Jesus' day. Not exactly, again, like this, maybe even more trees, and again, all the way up the hill. And the Mount of Olives, for those of you who have been here, it's a very high hill, very, very high. So, in coming here, the reason that he would come here is probably this. There is recorded in Josephus that Herod wanted to know how many people were here for Passover, and he came to the priests of the temple, and he said, how many would be here? So they said, well, one way we can do and get an estimate is we can count the livers that we've actually have left over from slaughtering the lambs for Passover, because there's approximately 10 people per lamb. And they counted about 650, I believe it was let's call it 600,000 livers, which means up to 6 million people. Well, where are they going to camp out? They're going to camp out on the hill. It'd be a beautiful place in April. Probably just need a blanket, build a fire in between the trees and so on. And so Jesus coming here would be the same thing. People from all over the world coming here for Passover. The other thing about Gethsemane is that when you're processing olives, you need an olive press. If you have an olive garden like you see here, you would have a olive press probably at the bottom of the hill. It only makes sense to bring your olives down rather than carrying them up. And an olive press in Hebrew is a gat. G-A-T is the transliteration, and that means press. Shemen is oil, and shemanim is oils. So the typical statement would be, if you have an olive press, you have a gat shemanim. And it's very interesting because you say that together, and you say gat shemanim, gat shemanim, gat shemanim, Gethsemane. And so all of a sudden we see that it is very likely that gat shemanim has somehow warped itself into Gethsemane. And it really makes a lot of sense because that's what the Mount of Olives was. It was a place where olives obviously were grown and harvested, and there would be an olive press. So it's very likely Jesus went to an olive press, a gat shemanim, in a cultivated garden called a gan. And that's exactly what the Mount of Olives was. So getting this picture, this is where he would have come. Now what's fascinating to me, I think from a faith lesson point of view, is the olive tree itself is a picture of Israel. An olive tree for us is, we say, we have been grafted into the olive tree of Israel. Another fascinating piece is, we would say Jesus, as you remember in Matthew 4, is called a Nazarene. Well, it doesn't say that, or the prophet says that he will be called a Nazarene. And everybody says that, see, there's a prophecy about him being from Nazareth. Well, there was no Nazareth till about 150 BC. However, the Hebrew word, he will be called notzerit, a branch from the stump of Jesse, of the olive tree. And that's in Hebrew, that's in Isaiah 11. So again, it seems as if God is painting a picture for us. He's coming into this olive grove, and the olive grove, these olive trees, are representing us and all of Israel. We're grafted into the olive tree of Israel, and he's coming here to pray, and we remember what he prays. Someplace on the olive grove or in the olive press itself, he's praying that the Lord would, his Father would actually have this cup pass away from him. However, he does drink the cup of suffering that we are all supposed to actually drink ourselves, because all of us are sinful, all of us are guilty, but because he drank the cup of God's wrath and actually cleansed us from our sin, we do not have to face that cup anymore. So this is that picture that I wanted you to see. However, question is, have they ever found a gat shemanim here at the Mount of Olives? Have they ever found an olive press? So what I'd like to do is, well, I'm going to go to part 3 of our series here. Here at part 3, we'd like to take you to another location here in the Kidron, or at least a little bit above the Kidron Valley, here at the Mount of Olives, and to talk a little bit more and to finalize on what we mean by gat shemanim, what we mean by olive press, especially with the 4 gospel accounts. So please, come with me, and we'll go to the next location. Come.